But yeah, let's get started. Welcome everyone to another session of our series on theologies of transformation and actions for justice. We have not met in a few months. The last time we met was in the month of July when Pastor Jay Fast gave a reflection on our fifth Interfaith Action principle of peacemaking, where he explored the rich concept of shalom, the role of lament, and the challenge of peacemaking in a world filled with violence. So that was a wonderful reflection and discussion following. Tonight, we are going to be discussing our sixth Interfaith Action principle on the protection and preservation of our common home. And I was mentioning to Pastor Sal before that it's wonderful that this conversation is happening during the season of creation, which is from September 1st through October 4th. Interfaith Action provides a resource for the season of creation, sort of a weekly guide to listening to the voice of creation if you're interested in jumping in. But that resource can really be used year-round if it's of interest. And then I'll also just throw in that a good companion to that is our Green Faith Action framework, which connects our values as people of faith to environmental actions. So very practical action steps in regards to the environment, and I'll post those in the chat here in a minute. But before we keep on going, I want to introduce our speaker for this evening. We have the privilege of welcoming the Reverend Salvatore Sapienza to give a reflection on the sixth interfaith principle. Pastor Sal is the pastor of Douglas United Church of Christ. He's a graduate of New York University and All Faith Seminary in New York City, a former Catholic monk, and an ordained interfaith minister with privilege of call in the United Church of Christ. I am going to read our principle together so we can all have a look at it before we start. Can everyone see this? All right. We advance the value of our common home, the planet. We affirm that God owns creation. We are renters and stewards of our common home. Dominion belongs to God. We believe we as a people of faith have a bedrock commitment to the protection and preservation of creation, countering the threats of climate change, and investing in individual and collective practices and policies that create a healthy future for the totality of our environment. In our stewardship of our common home, the planet, we are burdened by the reality that climate change most dramatically impacts the poor, the marginalized, and the migrant. So a lot in there. Pastor Sal, grateful that you're going to unpack that for us, and welcome.
And thank you everyone for joining. I'm so grateful to have received the invitation and the opportunity to speak with you all this evening. As Stephen mentioned, I'm the pastor at the Douglas United Church of Christ, which is down in the Saugatuck area of West Michigan, such a beautiful place where we experience God's creation all around us. We are so proud to be a part of Interfaith Action. And we're so proud last year to receive the Green Faith Community certification from Interfaith Action. That means a lot to us. Our church is very involved in issues of creation. Back in 2017, our church became designated as a creation justice church. This is a national organization, Creation Justice Ministries, and it sees caring for creation as a justice issue. So as you know, in order to receive the Green Faith Community certification from Interfaith Action or the designation from Creation Justice Ministries, our churches have to demonstrate all the things we're doing in our church and in our community to care for the environment. And so we have a very, very active creation team at our church. Just this past Saturday, for example, they led us in a beach cleanup of Oval Beach here in Saugatuck. We were joined by our friends from All Saints Episcopal Church in Saugatuck, which many of you know is also an Interfaith Action Green Faith community. And together we cleaned up the beach. We picked up more than 50 pounds of trash on Saturday. And then the next day, Sunday, yesterday, The sermon at our church was given by Dr. Deborah Rienstra. She is a professor at Calvin University, and she's written a wonderful new book called Refugia Faith, and it is all about caring for the planet. We, as Stephen mentioned, our church, like many churches, during this time is celebrating the season of creation. And so every Sunday, we've been focusing on a different theme of creation. Now, I share all of this with you to begin with, because as Stephen mentioned, tonight we're talking about that sixth principle of interfaith action, and it's our common home, the planet. And yet I have to say that as a Christian pastor, I'm often very dismayed because I find that many Christians fail to see a connection between their faith and caring for the planet. A recent poll of climate change deniers, the people who think climate change is a hoax, it found that 98% of them also identify as Christian. 98%. Now, why do you think that is? I mean, why does an overwhelming majority of climate change deniers, why are they Christian? Why do so many Christians in this country see a disconnect between their faith and caring for the planet, our common home? Well, I think that some of this is political. White evangelical Christians in this country tend to be more concerned with protecting the economy than they are in protecting the environment. And they seem much more concerned with protecting our borders than protecting the planet. So an oil pipeline or a multi-million-dollar housing development, they believe that that's good for our nation's economy and strength. And that for them takes precedence over any damage that may be done to God's creation. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed." And the other reason that I think many climate change deniers are Christian is due to fundamentalism and biblical literalism. Science has disproven so many of the stories of the Bible. So if you understand those stories in the Bible literally, well, then you must think that science is wrong. So in the Bible, for example, we hear the creation story, but science, of course, points to evolution. And that doesn't fit with the fundamentalist narrative. So for them, science must be dismissed. Religious beliefs trump scientific facts. But you know, religion and science need not be mutually exclusive. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Science deals with facts. Religion deals with values. The two are not rivals, they're complementary." And Carl Sagan once said, "The notion that science and spirituality are mutually exclusive does a disservice to them both." Now, I believe in science, and I also believe in God, a God who dwells with us here. Many Christians, though, believe God is up there. They believe the whole point of our being here is to get up there. And therefore, all that's here can be used up because this isn't our true home. That is. That's what they believe. And they believe that the God up there will renew the face of the earth. It's God's job to do that, not ours. And they believe the God up there affects the climate, not us. And they believe the God up there gave us dominion over the earth, meaning we could do whatever we want to it. But they confuse the word dominion from the Bible with the word domination. Domination means to conquer, but dominion means to govern, to care for. We are called to be caretakers of God's creation, to be good stewards, which means to be God's stewards. We're called to be guardians of the garden, this beautiful paradise, this Eden, which God has entrusted to our care. Diana Butler Bass is one of the leading progressive Christian writers today. And in her book, Grounded, the subtitle is Finding God in the World, a Spiritual Revolution. In that book, she calls upon people of faith to shift their perspective from God up there to God right here. And in the book, she writes, Christianity has imprinted a certain theological template that God exists far off from the world. The role of religion, therefore, is to act as a holy elevator between God above and those muddling around below in the world. Because of this, she says, church has become a struggle for me. I found it increasingly difficult to sing hymns that celebrate a hierarchical heavenly realm, to recite creeds that feel disconnected from life, and to find myself confined to a hard pew in a building with no clear windows to the outside world. This has not happened because I'm angry at the church or at God. Rather, it's happened because I'm moving around in the world and I've begun to realize how beautifully God is everywhere, in nature, in my neighborhood, in considering the stars. It took me 5 decades, she says, to figure it out, but I finally understand. The church is not the only sacred space. The world is profoundly sacred as well. And thus I fell into a gap, she says, a theological ravine between church still proclaiming conventional theism with a 3-tiered universe and the spiritual revolution of God with us. I love that. I love that so much. I believe that revolution takes place when more and more of us begin to shift our view of God from vertical to horizontal. We begin to see God in everything, in all of creation. When we begin to understand then that when we hurt the environment, we're hurting God. You know, every single time there's a climate disaster happening in the world, a disaster of our making, we see so many Christian leaders calling us to prayer and to pray to God to fix what's happening. And you know what I think God would say in response? I think God would say, you're responsible for it. You fix it. And that's why it saddens me that a majority of Christians in our country today have little concern for what's happening with the environment. They don't see it as a faith issue, and they don't see it as a justice issue. A recent Pew survey showed that just 6% of Christians in our country say their religious views influence whether they think there should be stronger laws protecting the environment. Only 6%. Now, we feel very differently, we the churches of Interfaith Action, and I know in my denomination, the United Church of Christ, we actually have someone whose job title is the UCC Minister for Environmental Justice. That's his job. His name is Reverend Brooks Barrett. And he says that because Christians are less likely to believe in climate change, they're less likely to mobilize around issues of environmental justice. I believe that we as people of faith, we have to shift from that distant God of conventional religion and experience a more intimate sense of the sacred that is with us in this world, all around us. I believe that's what Jesus was trying to teach us. He never said God was up there. He said the kingdom of heaven is at hand. It is here and now. God is here. God is in the world, in the soil, in the water, in the sky. God is everywhere in the world all around us. We are here to protect the sacred, to honor the Mother Earth. We dishonor her when we turn a blind eye to issues of environmental justice. I believe it is our duty as people of faith to care for the environment. And part of that duty is to make our voices heard, to speak scientific truth to blind faith. And we also make our voices heard by attending town hall meetings and by writing our political leaders and by taking to the streets and protests, as we did a few years ago with the People's Climate March. That's part of how we evangelize. I'm so grateful to be a part of a green faith community, a creation justice church, and to be a part of Interfaith Action for all of the good work that our faith communities in Southwest Michigan are doing to educate, to inspire, to challenge, and to motivate people that our common home is here and now, and we must do all that we can to be good stewards of it. May it be so. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Sal. Wonderful reflection, a lot in there. So thank you for that. At this time, I'll turn it over to the group and ask you all for your thoughts or any reflections or questions for Pastor Sal.
Let me start off. The statistics relative to the percentage of Christians who are climate deniers is quite disturbing. It somewhat parallels other research that indicates the more likely someone is to be a weekly attender of worship services, the more likely that person is to be a racist. So how do you, in both your pastoring and your community leadership role, seek to be this minority voice, to be a counter voice to, at least within a Christian context, perhaps a majority of Christians, both around issues of the environment and other justice issues?
That's a great question, Sid. I think a big part of it is visibility. You know, I think it's very important that we as a church are doing things to care for the environment in our communities. So I know here in Saugatuck and Douglas, people see Douglas UCC cleaning up the beach. And when they drive along the highway, they see the sign that says, "This highway adopted by Douglas UCC Church." And they see us at the People's Climate March. And I think it's true, not just for issues of the environment, but you know, it's important for people to see someone with a collar at a gay pride parade, or to see a church taking part in a Black Lives Matter march. You know, again, this is how we let people know that there's not a disconnect between our being people of faith and these issues of justice. I think so much of it is really being visible in the community. There are so many wonderful churches who are hearing very inclusive and progressive messages on Sunday, but I'm not sure how visible that is behind their church walls. So I think community involvement is so important, and that's why we're grateful to be part of Interfaith Action, because you're all doing such amazing things out in the community.
Good evening, everybody, and good evening, Pastor Sal. What a joy to be in your presence again, even if only through Zoom. Thank you for that inspiring message. I agree that presence in the community is important, and I think the same is true of Judaism as of Christianity, despite the fact that as Jews, we are committed to the notion of tikkun olam, repairing the earth, and yet too often that message gets left in the synagogue and not brought out to the community. So I know it's happening in Douglas and needs to happen more often in lots of places. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Larry. So good to see you. Larry and Sandy came to our church in Douglas before COVID, did a wonderful workshop for us on the beautiful book that they wrote, Building Bridges Across the Racial Divide. We still talk about your visit and how much you inspired us. But again, just like you said, Larry, it's about being out and visible in the community.
We still talk about it too, and about how much you inspired us.
Thank you.
Liturgically, our faith communities have not promoted the sacred texts that speak to environmental justice. I think it's why we encourage folks to consider some of the liturgical resources in this season of creation as a way of communicating both through words and symbols, as Pastor Sal indicated, that this is our joy, this is our duty, this is our accountability as people of faith, as people of God. And as the universal faith community looks at this period in September as a season where we reflect on our accountability, putting a pitcher of water on the table in front of a worship space, or a bowl of fruit as symbols of our connection to all of creation. And so as Pastor Sal has indicated, it's both that visibility outside the walls of the worship space, but it's also messages and symbols and songs and poetry inside the worship space to equip folks for the work outside. And I fear the faith communities have neglected that preparation.
Yeah. Yeah, Larry.
I'd like to ask Pastor Sal to talk a bit about what I think is a dilemma as of the present moment, when people are worried about sky-high gas prices. People want the prices to come down so we can pump more gas, when people in Europe are worried about not having enough natural gas to survive the winter. they are going to be fixated on the economic issues and climate issues behind as less immediately important. I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's a very good question, Larry. It is. It's people are, and rightfully so, concerned about their pocketbook and the price of things, but yes, I think for us to be able to educate people, I mean, I think that's part of our role in caring for our common home is to help educate people. And I think when we educate people on electric vehicles and those kinds of things, to kind of let them know that this is happening. This is a very real thing that we're going to be seeing more and more of, and this is the future, and to make it kind of maybe less scary for people, and to show them. I think we need to be people of hope, and to kind of show them examples of things that are happening, around the world, with electric vehicles and so on. But I know, I think the big issue is that it seems so overwhelming. People feel like, what can we possibly do? Is it too late, to make any change? So I think that hope, instilling hope in people, is really, really important. And that's, another plug for the Refugee of Faith book. Is the author is calling us to become communities of refugia, which may be a new word for you, but places of refuge, places where there's hope and light and growth. And if we have a lot of little communities of refugia, we can really affect change.
I very much like the idea of using examples where things are happening that are hopeful.
I'd like to say, it's interesting that for us Christians, the Psalter has been sort of one of our main prayer books. And there's so much about creation, but we sort of connected that we need to preserve this creation. We need to respect it and encourage it, respect for it. We just sort of take it for granted that God created it all and for us to use as we want to. And I think we could take some tips maybe from the indigenous communities that often had a greater respect for creation and the natural world than many of us have had. We sort of took that phrase in the creation story, and man has become dominant over creation. And we sort of like, well, we can use it and treat it the way we want to. We're just beginning to realize that much of our treatment of creation was destroying it, ruining it, polluting it, instead of respecting it. So when we read those Psalms, we need yes, God created it and we must respect it.
You're so right, Mary. Thank you for sharing that. There's so many beautiful Psalms that have to do with creation. We sing about them as well in our churches, but yes, there seems to be a disconnect between what we're saying and singing and then what we're doing. But you're so right. Native American spirituality is all about seeing God in everything, the rivers, the mountains, the stars. And I think we can learn a lot from them.
Well, something I wanted to talk about as well is that the latter half of this principle, we talk about how climate change most dramatically impacts the poor, the marginalized, and the migrant. In Michigan, the most polluted communities also tend to have the highest levels of poverty and the greatest disparities in health outcomes. In the coming year, Interfaith Action is going to be focusing our attention on these vulnerable communities from a comprehensive environmental justice perspective, in part using what's called the New Michigan Environmental Justice Screening Tool. I could say a little bit about that. Sid, would you want to say anything about that tool and its potential for exploring some of these environmental issues and bringing those to a policy level?
Sure. We're, I think, very grateful that the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy has developed this environmental justice screening tool, which is able to evaluate census tracts throughout our state. And it evaluates census tracts around 26, I think, indicators of well-being. About 1/3 of those are related to traditional environmental factors, potable water, polluted streams, agricultural runoff. About 1/3 are related to health outcomes, mortality, low infant birth weight, maternal and child deaths, those kinds of indicators. And then the remaining third are related to socioeconomic factors, unemployment rates, percentage of persons living in poverty, housing affordability. And those are then aggregated to be, and local census tracts are scored as to their level of vulnerability. And the findings in general, these need to be looked at specific communities, but in general are that the poorest communities are the most polluted communities, are the communities with the greatest disparities in health outcomes, greatest disparities in income and other well-being factors. And of course, I think, Stephen, as you were commenting, I was reminded that the CIA about a year ago indicated that one of the primary threats to the security of the globe and the security of the US is climate change prompted migration, and that individuals will be forced to migrate because of drought, because of economic despair, because of hunger, and will move to different parts of the globe which already may be experiencing overpopulation, creating widespread anxiety and fear and potential violence. So to your point that climate change does trigger migration, does trigger further entrenchment of despair and disadvantage.
Well, and like I said, in the coming year, that is going to be a focus for us. So if you are interested, or if someone you know might be interested in joining that work and participating, please let Sid or I know as we connect faith to action in that way. Are there any?
Sal, without having read the book Refugia, it seems to connect to the premise of the book, as you've indicated to us, that we are called to be places of refuge, places of hope, places of well-being.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I wasn't really familiar with the term refugia. She explains at the beginning of the book how it really came about after the Mount St. Helens volcanic explosion, if you remember, so many years ago. Scientists thought that it would take generations for there actually to be some life or some growth there. And actually, it just took a few years. They were really surprised, but there were these little pockets where things would sprout and grow. And so her message for us is that, yes, we can be those little pockets of hope and growth. So, yeah, I love the term, and it's really a wonderful book. But I'm so grateful. There's so many really wonderful writers who are writing about the environment from a faith perspective. And of course, I'm grateful to Interfaith Action. I see Stephen has shared in the chat there the season of creation resources that Interfaith Action has created, and they're wonderful. And so I hope people will use them in their faith communities, readings and song ideas and decoration ideas and all of that.
Well, I'll share that I was struck by that quote from Diane Butler Bass, asking the question of what if we viewed God as being everywhere, all around us, and not only viewing our faith community as sacred spaces, but the whole world around us, how differently we might act. So thank you for your reflection and your message to us this evening, and for this wonderful conversation with all of you. Our next program is in the month of October, and that's actually going to be with Dr. Tatiana Reynosa, who's here on the call. So we're looking forward to that. That's going to be on our principle of migration and hospitality. So please join us for that. Look for an email with the Zoom link. But thank you all for your time this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next month.